Hello and welcome to the Life at Leyton podcast with me, Sarah Glanville, as your host. Here at Leyton UK, we know our people are more than just their job. The careers of our people are part of their unique lives, and who they are as a whole person is what fundamentally contributes to their success and the success of our business. In the podcast, we'll spend time with one of our exceptional people from across the business. And in each episode, we'll look to explore the people behind the job titles, the unique and brilliant stories that make them who they are. This episode is a special one. Here, today, we celebrate Pride Month by having a fantastic conversation with Maria Kowal. Maria is one of our brilliant technical consultants here in Glasgow, and she agreed to sit down and share her experience as part of the LGBTQIA+ community and what that means for her here at Leyton UK. Maria, I can't thank you enough for this open, transparent and enlightening conversation. I hope for those of you listening in the queer community that you walk away from today's episode feeling seen, heard, valued, and that you belong here at Leyton UK. And I hope for those of you who are allies of the community that you have a better understanding of what we can do to support our peers and keep progressing forward for a more equitable world. Happy Pride Month to you all. So thank you for tuning in. Grab yourself a coffee and get ready to be inspired by the people that are Leyton UK. Hello Maria, welcome to episode 7 of the Life at Leyton podcast. Thank you for agreeing to do this with me. How are you today?
Warm.
Yes.
It's we've actually just had an argument about how warm it is in the office because I think it's about 5 degrees warmer than everybody else is, but that's just because I'm heat sensitive. So
it is really warm today.
Yeah, it is sweltering.
Got to make the most of it here in Scotland when the sun's shining, but it is hot.
Yes.
So we are here today during Pride Month to talk about Pride Month and your experience as part of the LGBTQIA+ community. So to get us started, could you introduce yourself to all our listeners and from your perspective tell us what is Pride Month and why is it important?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Maria Kowal. I've been a technical consultant at Leyton for going on 4 years. My relationship to the queer community or the LGBTQIA+ community is that I identify as bisexual or pansexual depending on sort of your definitions. That's kind of an influx definition, I suppose. And I'm very much a trans ally as well because unfortunately that is not necessarily an obvious thing these days. So for me, like Pride is sort of this, it kind of encompasses a lot of different things within the community. So first and foremost, Pride is a form of protest. It's protesting the injustices of the past and the injustices that the community still faces today. And so drawing attention to those matters and making, reminding the community and people outside the community that we're still fighting for something. Secondly, Pride is a celebration. It's a celebration of who you are, a celebration of how far we've come since those first parades and, the gains that we have made from activities like this. And also it's like a personal pride. It's a personal expression. It's an opportunity to educate yourself and to educate others and just keep the conversation going and just feel good about yourself. And it's really important because for such a long time, people weren't allowed to feel important, feel good about that particular aspect of themselves. Like the first Pride March was in June 1970, and that was to mark the 1 year anniversary of the protests that kicked off after the harassment and the campaign of harassment and violence that police in New York inflicted on the gay community. And it's, from there it's just spread across cities and across the globe, so that, everybody somewhere is marching. And it's important to keep that going because it sort of kind of expresses to the people who might be quiet or might be very loudly trying to put us back in the closet to say, no, we're still here and we're still fighting and you're not going to get rid of us that easily, basically.
Yeah.
So I think that's why it's important, I think, to me, but also I think hopefully to most of the community.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was beautifully put. It's clear to see it's a celebration, and you guys and people who are allies of the community are out supporting the community.
Yeah.
But I think it is so important what you've said there, that we look back and we remember the struggle that has been to get to the point we are today, and to also face into the fact that there's still so much that we need to continue to work towards equality.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I guess maybe you want to touch on this a little bit more, why the conversation is still ongoing. So why can't we stop talking about Pride?
So there seems to be a certain proportion of people that seem to think it's counterproductive for the LGBTQIA plus community to be like loudly shouting and like about their rights and trying to like sort of, in quotations, like put it in, like, you know, shove it in people's faces is the term I've heard used. And they feel like it's counterintuitive because it might make people who are otherwise potential allies sort of turn against them, or feel like they're, you know, asking for too much or what have you. You know, because, you know, those people might not like being inconvenienced or shouted at, or have it implied that they're homophobic if they don't like pride parades. But like, there's a few problems with that attitude, which is that firstly, progress never came from anybody sitting quietly and asking politely. Progress has always come from people shouting for their rights, and we've seen this with every wave of feminism, from the suffragettes through to fourth wave, and for every major period of black rights activism. That, you know, the movements were necessary to get the progress that we got. They would not have happened if people hadn't stood up and made their voices heard.
Yeah,
and that's why. You know, that's why in 1970 they were making their voices heard, and that's why still now we're trying to make our voices heard. And I think that goes for every minority community or every underprivileged community. So, you know, and that's very much, you can just look at like gay marriage, for example. Like, gay marriage didn't happen because, you know, gay people asked nicely. It happened because they kept shouting at like the people who had the power until they couldn't ignore them anymore.
Yeah.
And like that is the way it happens. It never just happens because social change only comes from that kind of pressure.
Yes.
Because otherwise people are just happy for things to stay as they are. So, you know, it is still important for that to happen. The next point for, you know, that I have that issue, an issue with that perspective, is that whilst, you know, gay rights as we understood them sort of 20 years ago may be much better established now, trans rights are very much far from being securely protected. And you really don't have to look much further than what happened in Scotland versus Westminster with the Gender Reform Bill. And, you know, nowadays any attempt to sort of promote trans pride is always met with a counter protest from people who are shouting for women's rights and sort of like a demonstrably untrue notion that trans women are somehow a danger to cis women, and they're not even women at all. And it's just, you know, that just having that there, and the fact that is still happening.
Yeah.
You know, imagine, my direct parallel for that is always the last time anybody said it wasn't okay for certain people to be in other people's spaces like bathrooms was segregation of black people in the United States under Jim Crow laws. And it's very much not something that we would ever consider trying to enforce today. So why are we trying to do it to another underprivileged community now? Like, how has that ever gone the way of history, you know? History's never looked kindly on that particular viewpoint, for very good reason. And there's also an assumption within the viewpoint that, you know, we don't need to shout about it all the time and shove it in people's faces, which is that queer people already do have all the rights that they need. And the issue with that is that, first off, it's not true everywhere. There's countries all around the world where gay people are not safe, trans people are definitely not safe and not allowed to be who they are. But even within countries where they are like legally established rights, having a right established in law does not mean that you have the same experience within society. It's been seen in countless cases where even though you cannot be legally discriminated against, there are still companies and police forces and private individuals with power, politicians who get away with saying or doing very discriminatory things.
Yeah.
And, even if that's, even if you have the legal right to, get married, there might still be somebody somewhere who doesn't want you to get married on their property, or doesn't like the fact that they live next door to you. Like, it's still not, equal rights is not just about the legal side of things. It is about sort of your life experience, like how you were able to live your life.
Yeah.
And that's where we're not at yet. And I also would like to say that, like, just because they are established in law doesn't mean that they're secure. Like, you look at what happened with Roe v. Wade.
Yes.
Like, that's very clearly demonstrated that certain things that had thought to be established and settled and done can be very quickly taken away. And fortunately, the US actually signed into law a bill in December that would protect the equal, I think it's the Respect Marriage Act or something like that, that would prevent them from getting to gay marriage the same way they did to Roe v. Wade through that loophole. But the fact that they're having to put in those types of protections tells you that there are very powerful people out there still trying to take those rights away.
Yeah.
And that goes for this country as well. They're just maybe further in the shadows about it, which sounds a bit conspiratorial, but they're there. Like, there's those people in every country. So as soon as they get power, they're going to try and enact it. So that's, it's never a given thing that your rights are there to stay.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's why we need to keep fighting. Like, there's so much about it that it's not settled in any way whatsoever. And I think part of Pride is making sure that people are aware of that as well. Like, if somebody asks, like, why are you still parading, why are you still marching? It's like, well, I'm glad you asked. Here you go. These are all the reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's so clear from what you've said there, all the reasons that we need to keep championing this month. I guess that leads really nicely on to my next question, which is, what can we all do more of to support people within the community and to be allies of the LGBTQAI plus community? I think these days the best thing you can do to be an ally is to literally just be there for for those people. So don't turn away from the movements don't turn away from the arguments when you see them happening. Like, I think it's so easy to get frustrated with things like the debate over trans rights and be like, oh, I'm sick of hearing about it. It's just the same argument over and over again. Like, don't turn away from that. That's your privilege at work. The fact that you can turn away from that without getting hurt, that's your privilege at work. Like, and that's something that I have to remember too. They it's I'm part of the queer community, but I'm not part of the trans community, even though I am an ally. So there's different layers to it. Your experience is not somebody else's experience, and you should, when it's somebody else's experience that is on the line, it's them that you should be listening to. And I think it's often the case that the quote unquote reasonable anti-progressive perspective is the one that has been given the mainstream on screen and on airtime. And often the people who are fighting hard for their rights, who have gotten frustrated and angry and upset by this point by being inhibited for so long, and being put down for so long, they're often brushed as like the angry, unreasonable activists, who are just shouting and screaming. And the reason they're shouting and screaming sometimes is that they've been locked in this life for so long that it's just getting too much. It's frustrating.
Yeah, and it's not an over-exaggeration to say that lives are on the line, because we do know for a fact that trans people and back in the sort of the 20th century, gay people were much more likely to commit suicide because they couldn't lead the lives that they wanted to lead. And that's what things like, pushing back the gender reform bill is doing to people. It's stopping people from being able to live the lives they want and need to live. And it is going to cost lives. And it's going to cost life for the sake of a handful of people who find it uncomfortable to be around somebody who isn't like them. And I think, that's... it's not the narrative that is being pushed. Like, I think that it's being blanketed over, like that, people who are pushing back for concerns over women's safety are being given a bigger voice than they deserve relative to the harm that they're doing. I think that's definitely what J.K. Rowling seems to be doing. Like, she is an incredibly wealthy woman with a very big platform and a lot of social power, who is claiming to be the victim in a circumstance where she is literally treading on the rights of people who don't have any. She's never ever going to see it that way, but she's given the airtime and she is apologized to, and she's called out for what she's saying. So it's very important to make sure that you're listening to the real experiences of the people whose rights are actually on the line.
Yeah.
I would also say as well that if you do get involved in a debate, or you are sort of getting involved in the conversation in any way, remember that playing devil's advocate and trying to find like a reasonable middle ground is almost as hurtful as like open homophobia or like open transphobia, because it silences people. It sort of shows that you are putting their needs and their rights second to finding a peaceable solution or finding like your own comfortable middle ground. And that's, I think that's something that a lot of women our age who would have been involved in the not all men period of Twitter, have probably had that conversation with a man who is like, well, I've never sexually harassed anybody, or I don't know any women who've been sexually assaulted. And it's like, well, it feels like you're being shut down because they are not seeing your experience in the interest of, staying true to their own experience or trying to protect themselves. And that is very much the same thing. Like, which is why I find it so frustrating that it's that sexually abused women or like physically abused women are being used as the reason for putting down trans rights, is because we have literally just had this debate about our own issues. So like that's just it's very frustrating from that point of view. But if you are having this conversation, whether there's somebody of the community in the room or not, you should always be making sure that you are listening to and promoting the actual experiences and stories of people who are like in that community and living that life, rather than what you think it is or what you've heard somebody else say it is. That's my there's a lot of frustration in that one, but
and I think it's right for there to be frustration. I think it's sometimes people do not see their own privilege, and that's a very privileged position to be in. But people don't see it because it's not the life that they live or the road that they walk.
And I think there's like a lot of people feel like when their privilege is called out that they're being attacked. And it's not the case. It's just it's not trying to take that life away from you. We're just trying to say you have to recognize that other people don't have what you have. And that if we get involved and we help them, they can have that without you losing anything. Like, privilege is not a limited resource, like everybody can have the same quality of life if we want them to. We just have to have the will to put that change out there and make it happen.
What can employers do to engage and embrace the LGBTQIA plus community?
I think by being more outspoken and less passive in supporting the community. So a lot of large corporations won't take an active stance or like actively support like the trans community or trans rights or even gay rights in certain parts of the world, because they're scared of like chasing away clients or having people boycott them or having like political parties come after them or something like that. And I think if a company really does, like if a company wants to have that badge of I am an ally, they really need to step into it. Like it needs to be basically needs to be something more than making their logo a rainbow in June. Like the donating to like LGBTQIA charities, providing a platform for people who don't currently have a voice, like making sure that there's resources for people to get the story out there and to actually fight the fight. And when I say donating to charities, I don't mean like just getting the employees to do like a roundup or like a cake day or what have you, which is fine, we can do that. But I mean like the company itself should be publicly donating to these charities. without cutting out, like, without taking that out of workers' pay. Basically, like, it should be out of their profits, like a charitable donation, and like very publicly putting it on the map that they are behind that community. Otherwise, it doesn't really mean anything. Awareness campaigns are great, but Pride has gotten to that point where every June, like we know everybody's aware now. It has to be actual, like, real change and real efforts.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that you were kind of stagnated on that. And there's always pushback. There's still people in the States, especially, but even in the UK, who are like, anytime a company puts a rainbow logo on something, they're like, well, I'm not buying that anymore. It's like, come on, like
yeah.
That's the least, like, harmful thing in the world. So yeah, just like, but it still just doesn't mean enough. Like, it doesn't do enough anymore. Every company does that now. Now, if you want to be a true ally, you need to step it up and do something real.
Yeah. What considerations do people in the community have when it comes to making career decisions? Have you ever felt it impacts yourself personally?
My sexuality is not something that directly impacts me in choosing a career, because I'm not one of the more vulnerable groups. I'm not part of one of the more vulnerable groups, but the considerations that I know others take, and things that I have had to consider when considering my gender and my mental health, which are other aspects that affect my work, the main thing is the immediate environment that you're in. Like the stance of the company itself and the behavior of the company is a thing, obviously, but especially when it's a larger corporation, the immediate environment that you're going to be in, the exact people that you're going to be working with, that's going to be the major decider in how your gender or sexual identity impacts what job you go for and how long you stay somewhere. There's a difference, like, technically, yeah, so it's a legal right within the UK that you can work anywhere without being discriminated against for who you are or who you love, but it's very, very different knowing that you have legal protection and then actually feeling comfortable somewhere.
Yes.
So it's it's very much worth remembering, like, we're an interesting generation because we are generally quite accepting of each other and of the generation below us compared to, like, the generation before us. But we were actually raised in a very strange time for equal rights, because up until 2003 it was prohibited by Section 28 for teachers and other people in positions of authority to actually even talk about gay rights, like what that life looks like, what it's like to go through coming out, let alone trans people, like that. That wasn't even on the radar. They were very much just worried about, like, gay people and homosexuality. So, like, up until I was 13, my teachers wouldn't have been able to, if I was struggling with that, nobody at my school would have been able to help me with that. And that, I didn't come out until I was in my 20s, but I know people who did come out when they were in their teens, and, like, that's just you have to find your resources elsewhere, because it's so hard to tell your parents. It's so hard to to find the resources, like, in the library, whatever, because you wouldn't be in the school library, wouldn't be in the official library, because, again, Section 28. So it's at the time the internet was very young. So we've come from this era where we have this kind of enforced ignorance, and that goes for both people who are not in the community and people who are, and people who have obviously had the time to, like, learn themselves and know that, but they may still have a certain amount of repression around it when in a group of their own peers or older people.
Yeah.
Because they know that there's going to be things like awkward questions, weird reactions, people getting a bit uncomfortable or talking about them behind their back. Like, it's just like it's a very I always feel like I have to be quite comfortable around people or comfortable in my workplace before I will talk about anything like that. And it's just not something I think straight people have to worry about. Like, you can on your first day quite happily talk about, like, your partner, and your wedding and what have you. Whereas I think you might be, unless you are very confident, and obviously there are people who are, and that's another aspect of pride. Like, being confident, having those conversations. But it is kind of sometimes a bit awkward to be like, oh no, actually I'm not straight, or I'm not I am not the gender that I look like I am. Like I think that's quite difficult, especially like people coming out as trans and non-binary is an especially difficult thing to deal with. And if like I said, I came out in my 20s, we've got people here who are in their 20s, people in every workplace are in their 20s and younger, and like there'll be people who are coming out and who might need that support from their immediate environment but don't know how to ask for it. So it's kind of that will affect like where they go. They might choose to work somewhere that is openly like uses certain it uses pronouns, or go somewhere that has a track record of being good with this kind of thing. Like I think there's certain environments that are not going to be as instinctively supportive of that. So yeah, it's especially it's something that definitely affects people's choices and where they go. And how they progress, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I come from a talent acquisition perspective, so I guess I'm really interested how you would gauge that going through a recruitment process.
It can be difficult. A good place to look is places like Glassdoor reviews or other like website like company reviews. But if it's a smaller company, you can't guarantee being able to find that. The number of people who are queer and out and like posting on those reviews, the fraction is minuscule, so chances are it isn't going to come up. But usually reading through like the company's policy on that kind of thing, it will almost always be like the standard legal version. But making sure that they know and understand like the legislation and it's actually like properly addressed. It's also something that somebody like myself, who loves to talk and loves to like have these discussions, would ask in an interview. I didn't for Leyton. I wasn't as open then as I am now, but I think I would, if I was going into that process again here, I would ask them what the what protection, like what kind of legal employment law like they've looked into around that kind of thing. And actually when I did join Leyton, I was very upfront about my mental health and made sure that there would be protections in place for me for that, because that is something that I'd struggled with previously. So I think anybody who's faced discrimination at a previous job will automatically want to make sure that they're protected in that sense. Another thing would be to maybe go to employment advisors, people who might know a bit more than is available on the reviews and stuff, and say, okay, well, this company we know has a good track record. This company, like, they know what they're doing, but they don't have as much experience with it, or what have you. Or this company like really is a bit hostile. And then there are actually like very there will be specific community focused LGBTQIA plus community focused resources for that kind of thing as well. But yeah, it can be very difficult, and sometimes it will be a case of trial and error until you find somewhere that you do feel like you can be there safely and comfortably, which is unfortunate. You should be able to be anywhere. But this is the same, like I said, for any minority group, be it people of colour or women or gay or trans people. It's very much you don't know necessarily what you're walking into until you're there, and whether or not you're going to feel comfortable. So it's something that everybody needs to keep working on, I think.
Absolutely, agreed. So one of Leyton's values is belonging.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm interested to know if you feel that, and what we could do more of or be better at to help bolster that feeling of belonging.
Mm-hmm. I feel like I belong as me, as Maria. I have been here for so long, and I do feel like I gel well with the community, like with the community that Leyton has. Whether I feel like I belong as a queer person is a bit of a different question, because I don't at the moment, the concentration of queer people within any role is always going to be quite low, unless you happen to get you happen to be in an industry that draws has a bigger draw for that. So it means that I don't have that direct one-to-one experience with most of my colleagues. So it's sort of not really somewhere, Leyton is not really somewhere where I look for support from that kind of community aspect. I'm lucky because I've got a large group of friends outside who I made at uni and through various other activities who are largely, like, they are overrepresented in terms of LGBTQ plus QA plus identities. We've all got like very shared similar experiences from that point of view, so I've got support elsewhere. I guess one of the things that like I think that Leyton could do a bit better in is for people who, like I said earlier, people who are younger or people who are coming out whatever age they are and realizing who they are. It might be that their job or their colleagues are like the biggest pillar of their support network. They may not feel like they can come out to their family, or they may not have family close by. They might not have a large group of friends in the area, or like their friends may not have any experience with this kind of thing. So I think it's important for Leyton, as a workplace which does often form a huge part of people's lives, to have that kind of support ready for people, and we've done a good job over the last couple of years of creating a lot of support systems for mental health issues. I would really like to see the same done for LGBT stuff. Like it would, just like spaces where people can go, like specialists that they can access. I don't actually know, to be honest, if Support Room has like specialists for LGBTQIA plus, and they may well do, and that's on me for not knowing that, I suppose. But just something that's a bit more, like I've said, outside of Pride Month, year round, just making sure that people have that support network to go to, that resource to go to. And I know we're talking about sort of the mini networks within Leyton that we're setting up, and I think LGBTQIA plus people is one of the ones that has been suggested. And I really do think that's important. I think that's important for any, like I said, minority group, to be able to have that. And it's not a case of exclusion. It's a case of making sure you have somebody to talk to who has the same experience as you. And having a space where you can talk about that in the absence of anybody who might not get it.
A safe space.
It's one of those ones that I always find frustrating when people are not comfortable with the idea of safe space, and it's like, it's because you've never needed one. So it's I think having that, as same as we do for same basically level of support as we would have for mental health or people of colour, which I think is another one of the groups that's being started. So I think that's a really important thing to have access to in a place where you spend so much of your time and where you have so many of your friends and acquaintances. It just I think that would make a big difference.
And I think you made a terrific point earlier and then again there, where we are likely to have people who are not openly out as part of the population, or who are going through the period of time where they're deciding to come out. And I think that, operating like we always have someone in the room who
thank you for bringing that up, because that is something that I wanted to touch on. Was like, you will have a certain amount of demographic data from the employment process as to who may or may not identify as queer, but you won't necessarily have all of it because it's an optional thing and they are not obliged to tell you. So you may have people who are non-binary who just haven't come out yet, or trans and are not sure how to approach it, or people who are gay and don't want to talk about it. Like, that's entirely up to them. But if you are going to discuss these matters, like I said earlier, you don't, even if there's nobody in the room who that is a part of the queer community, still don't try to play the devil's advocate middle ground. Like, act as if, be an ally at all times, basically. And that goes for when you think there might not be somebody in the room, because there might be. Or there might be somebody who doesn't know yet and is going to come out later, or who has kids who might be gay that they don't know yet, and all of that kind of stuff. It stays with you and it builds up, and it can slow down the coming out process. It can make people suppressed. It can make people depressed and anxious. It's very important to, if you're going to be an ally and you're going to be supportive, it's important to do it all the time. There's no locker rooms. That whole locker room talk thing it's a thing of the past.
Yeah.
Assume that your locker room is full of women and people of color and trans people and gay people, keep the decency with you all the time. Basically, it's not just a mask that you're putting on. No. It should be how you act. It should be who you are.
And that's something very real that everyone can consciously make an effort to do. That's really going to help push us forward as a society. Thank you so much, Maria, for doing this with me. When we started the podcast, I said to you I wanted to tackle real topics of conversation, and it takes people like you who are willing to do that and to be honest and open and talk in this format. So I really appreciate you taking part. Do you have anything else that you want to mention before we sign off?
Just that, and thank you for saying that, I do appreciate it, but just that, not everybody is as willing and able to come forward and talk about it. So one of the things that you can do on top of sort of always being an ally is, and it's, again, it's part of listening to people, is if somebody doesn't want to talk about it, they don't have to talk about it. You should still be good and respectful and nice and an ally, but they are not obliged to tell you anything. They are not obliged to stand up and go to the rallies. They don't have to go on a pride march. They don't have to sit. They don't have to come and join the podcast. It's entirely up to them how much they want to get involved, because it's an emotionally and mentally draining thing to do, to constantly be defending or explaining who you are and what rights you should have. So if somebody is getting up and involved in the debate, be there and support them. If they're not, be there and support them. That's it, really.
Absolutely. Thank you. No worries. Thank you so much. Amazing. Thank you everyone for listening along at home as well. I hope that you got as much from that conversation as I did. We're going to be back in 2 weeks' time with our 8th episode, talking to another incredible person here at Leyton UK. But until then, if you're one of the members in our talent community and you are interested in finding out more about what the future might look like at Leyton, please do reach out to one of us here in the talent acquisition team. I'll put my contact details in the description below, or check out our careers page for the roles that we have live currently. We'll be back in a few weeks. Thanks again, Maria, for sharing your story. Thank you all for listening in. This has been episode 7 of the Life at Leyton podcast.